helmsman, do you have a fix on it?
There is no known phenomenon which would account for these readings.
I couldn't face going through there again.
Hello, and welcome back to Junkball Media, a video series that's part review, part retrospective, but mostly just stuff. We're continuing on from part 1. Check it out first if you haven't yet. Here, we'll hit up the animated series, Phase 2, the refit, and stuff, like the studio power play over the ship's design. And, are these really the same ship? So we're continuing on with the USS Enterprise NCC 1701 Retrospective. When the original series was cancelled after 3 seasons, the animated series picked up the final 2 years of the Enterprise's 5-year mission. The exterior of the ship remained pretty much the same. I wish I could say more, but the team of artists did an extraordinary job of recreating every little detail on the Enterprise for the animated series. If there were any omissions or inconsistencies, they weren't intentional. There is one very minor omission on the ship's exterior. If you look closely, the turbolift module to the rear of the bridge dome is missing. And in the rear, there was a control deck overseeing the shuttle bay doors in the original series, and it's absent here. The updates to the animated Enterprise were mainly to her interior, which incidentally added a second turbolift to the bridge. We'll take a closer look at that when we get to her interior, but first, Gene Roddenberry made a second attempt to get his show about humanity in the future back on TV. So, in 1974, Gene Roddenberry created a pilot called Earth 2, about a guy from the 20th century named Dylan Hunt, who ends up in the 22nd century after a suspended animation experiment goes wrong. Wait, we've seen this before.
With his long wooden pipe, fuzzy woolly toes, he lives in a hobbit hole and everybody knows him. Bilbo Baggins, he's only 3 feet tall. Bilbo Baggins, the bravest little hobbit of them all.
Before Star Trek the Motion Picture became a motion picture, it was going to be a new television series called Star Trek Phase 2. Here's how the Enterprise was shaping up in this production. While developing the series, they considered introducing a brand new ship named Enterprise. 2 designers took a crack at designing the brand new ship. Ken Adams, famous from the James Bond franchise, and Ralph McQuarrie, who's fresh off his work on Star Wars. At this conceptual stage, they used geometric shapes. Even though this was a brand new Enterprise design, they honored Matt Jefferies' original design with continuing the saucer, secondary hull, and engine pods in the same basic configuration. They even kept the shuttle bay in the rear. Crude study models were constructed of the ship to aid in storyboarding. But as fate would have it, they would appear on screen many years later. The study model with the shorter nacelles appeared in Star Trek III. And the one with the taller pylons appeared in TNG's Unification. Later, they decided that the Enterprise would be the same ship from the original series. Matt Jefferies served as an advisor on the refit since he was still working on Little House on the Prairie. Designer Joe Jennings and illustrator Mike Miner were the hands-on artists in charge of the design. They updated the Enterprise with new warp nacelles, angled pylons, a photon torpedo bay at the base of the neck, a reshaped secondary hull, and a second turbolift on the bridge dome. Aside from that, more windows were added, and the hull markings were updated. The ship appeared in promotional art, but it's best represented in the fan production Star Trek New Voyages Phase 2. There's a link in the description below. Work on the Phase 2 refit Enterprise got as far as the construction of a 4-foot model when Paramount decided to cancel Phase 2 and move forward with Star Trek the movie. Production on the movie was a mess, and not just with the script rewrites, actor negotiations, and budget. Since this was now a movie, the TV visual effects team was replaced with a movie visual effects company. Typically, an art department creates the art, and a visual effects company figures out how to create that art on the screen. However, the effects company commandeered the art that Jennings and Miner had done and reduced their roles. Then the effects company proceeded with revising the Enterprise design to their specifications. Despite the bruised egos and power grabs going on behind closed doors, what audiences got was the Enterprise that arguably surpasses the original Enterprise. Designer Andrew Probert was brought in to continue designing the refit. This was still early in his career, but he would go on to do legendary work with Back to the Future and the Enterprise D. He's even been gracious enough to stop by the Enterprise D video on this channel to chat with fans. That's been one of the coolest things to happen since doing these videos, so thanks again, Mr. Probert. His final version of the refit Enterprise design would establish the visual language for every single Federation ship that we've seen since, most notably with the interlocking Aztec hull pattern, and abandoning the external deflector dish in favor of an integrated deflector dish. The saucer section was extended to balance out the ship's overall profile. The pylons were subtly updated with a more cohesive flow, and the warp engines were redesigned. These new warp engines were designed by Richard Taylor, who was the movie's art director, but they still tie in with the overall ship's look, thanks to these horizontal stripes along the saucer section rim. In the end, every single square inch of the Enterprise exterior was redesigned to the point that she's basically a new ship.
This is an almost totally new Enterprise.
Wait, is she a new ship? Actually, this could be an entirely brand new Enterprise. Before we go any further, let's be clear that we're talking about fiction. The designers weren't intending audiences to pull out their calipers and scrutinize every little measurement. Within the narrative, this is the same Enterprise. But for fun, let's take a closer look. So here's the original 1966 design, and here's the refit design. And let's line things up using the bridge dome. We can ignore the pylons and engine pods, since those are entirely new components. What we're left with is the saucer, neck, and secondary hull. As you can see here, the refit saucer is longer, so it's possible these two ships share the same inner structure with the saucer section. The refit's secondary hull is larger in diameter, which makes sense, so like the saucer section, the secondary hull could share the same inner structure with the original. But when you try to align the neck, the saucer section and secondary hull become misaligned. So that means during the refit process, the saucer section and secondary hull were separated and reattached with a new neck. This means that basically everything was replaced on the original 1966 design, except for the inner structures of the saucer section and secondary hull. But even then, who knows? It's like, is RoboCop still Alex Murphy? Is Galvatron still Megatron? Or is this Herbie still this Herbie? Okay, I'm going nowhere with this. Speaking of going nowhere, so in 1975, Gene Roddenberry was involved with a pilot called Strange New World, about a guy from the 20th century who ends up in the 22nd century after a suspended animation experiment goes wrong. It's still got togas, and John Saxon was
Hobbits are peace-loving folks, you know. They're never in a hurry and they take things slow. They don't like to travel away from home. They just like to eat.
From the ground up, this model was designed for the demands of a major motion picture. She had a rigid aluminum skeleton and exterior materials that can endure the heat of studio lights much better than the plastic, sheet metal, and wood used on the original series model. Also, the level of detail with her internal lighting and surface paint allowed the effects artist to film the ship from more angles and with extreme close-ups. Some of the internal running lights weren't actually lights embedded within the ship. Instead, they were actually external lights that were reflected off of tiny dental mirrors onto the hull of the ship. The runaway budget of Star Trek the Motion Picture was a bad thing for Paramount, but a great thing for fans. Sure, the mismanaged production led to some sequences being rushed, but on the other hand, some sequences were meticulous and stunning thanks to the enormous amount of time and money spent on them. Take the dry dock sequence for example. During this sequence, we see an extreme close-up of the saucer section. In the reverse shot, It's slightly out of focus through the shuttle pod's window. This is subtle, but it's an effective way of conveying the size of the ship. Little touches like this may only appear on screen for a few seconds, but it takes many hours to properly light, shoot, and process in order to get the final shot. The sophistication of the visual effects on Star Trek the Motion Picture surpass anything we'd see in the next 5 Star Trek movies. The paint job on the model had an iridescent quality. This played havoc in post-production when the background color that they needed to key out would reflect onto the hull surface. Effects artists spent days correcting these shots frame by frame. This is the best condition that the model would ever be in, as it was continually diminished with the subsequent movies. When time came for Star Trek II, the production didn't have the same time or budget granted to Star Trek I, so ILM had to do things quick and dirty. Shots from Star Trek the Motion Picture were reused wherever possible. For new shots, the model was sprayed with a gray matte finish. This allowed ILM to light and shoot the model much quicker, since they weren't hindered with the original iridescent paint.
Now, hobbits are peace-loving folks, you know. They're never in a hurry and they take things slow. They don't like to travel away from home.
So this has been the Enterprise in the animated series, Phase 2, and post-refit. We've still got her interior, her history before the original series, her destruction, her later appearances, or non-appearances, and stuff. All of that will be in the 3rd and final installment of the USS Enterprise Retrospective. If you want to stay in the loop, you've got options right here. And as always, thanks for watching, you jerks.
By the way, Mr. Sulu, any chance of teaching me that body throw? Could come in handy sometime.
I don't know, sir. It isn't just physical, you know. You have to be inscrutable.
Inscrutable? Sulu, you're the most scrutable man I know.